Hello, my dear students, and welcome to the English class. Today, we are going to talk about the Renaissance. We started last week with the Renaissance painters, and today we are going to talk about the Renaissance in general, uh, not only in the field of arts, but also in architecture and other events. We're going to see the timeline to understand what exactly happened during the Renaissance and the impact that this movement had on the rest of the society, where it was born and where it had the main impact. So my name is teacher Cosme, and today we'll be talking about the Renaissance. But what is the objective for today? Well, the objective for today is to identify the main events during the period of time, also known as the Renaissance. Okay, so the Renaissance, this period of time of big changes, took place between the 14th and the 17th century in Europe, okay, in Europe. And we are going to see exactly where. This era bridges the time between the Middle Ages and the modern times. So it points out to the end of the Middle Ages, and it also indicates the start of the modern era that we are living today. The word Renaissance means rebirth. And you can see here a painting that we have already mentioned with perspective. That is one of the main characteristics that we are going to see in the Renaissance. Before the Renaissance, the sense of perspective didn't exist. Okay, everything was two-dimensional. But here, there's even lines that give you reference to the concept of perspective. And you can see in the distance objects being perceived as smaller to give you the idea of perspective and volume. Also, shades give volume to the clouds, for example, in the background. Now, the Middle Ages began with the fall of the Roman Empire, right? The Roman Empire fell in the hands of the barbarians coming from Northern Europe. Much of the advances in science, art, and in government made by the Greeks first and then the Romans were lost during this time. Everything that the Greeks and the Romans have made, all the progress that they have made in terms of arts and engineering, science, medicine, and so on, all of that was swept away by these barbarian tribes. So the Renaissance was a time of coming out of the dark, because after the Dark Ages, right, people started to think about humanism, which is something that we are going to see later today. The Renaissance, as we have seen, it was a rebirth of several areas, for example, education, science, art, literature, music, and a better life for people in general. Not only the wealthy, not only the monarchy, but for people in general. On your left, on the left side of the screen, we can see the fall of the Roman Empire, the fall of Constantinople, right, in the hands of the Ottoman Empire. We're going to see the Ottoman Empire in a little while. But I'm going to show you another illustration of the fall of Constantinople. And these illustrations I'm pretty sure are popular today when you play video games. And where does that come from? Well, not all of it, not all of it, but part of it comes from the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. So the Renaissance was a cultural movement. A big part of the Renaissance was a cultural movement called humanism. The humanism says that the center of attention has to be people. People and his feelings, thoughts, opinions, and so on. Humanism was a philosophy that all people should learn the classic arts, literature, and science. It looks for realism and human emotion in arts, in all forms of art, not only painting, but also music, architecture, dance, so on and so forth. Humanism also said that it was okay for people to pursue comfort, riches, and beauty. It was not exclusive, it was inclusive, right? And on the left side of your screen, we can see the poet Petrarch, the Italian poet Petrarch, who started talking about the human condition in terms of feelings, deception, love, romanticism, and so on. Next, we have the Vitruvian Man. We have discussed this drawing before, but it's important because it also is a sign of humanism. We're going to see that the author was considered a Renaissance man, right? Leonardo da Vinci was a Renaissance man, not only because he was interested in the arts, but also in science, engineering, architecture, many, many other areas. Where did the Renaissance begin? Well, it began in Italy, more specifically in Florence, and then it spread to other city-states in Italy. We have to remember that a city-state has its own government. That means that these cities were politically independent. Part of the reason it began in Italy, it was because the history of Rome and the Roman Empire. City-states played a big role in the rule of Italy at the time because they were just small kingdoms. And so the local government played a big role in the development of each one of these city-states. So just to name a few, and the most important, you have Florence, Milan, Venice, and Ferrara. So here we have a map showing the republics, right? These city-states with the autonomous politics. So we have, for example, Milan and Venice to the north, Florence, more or less on the north center, Rome right in the center, and Naples is rather on the southeast side of Italy. So this map shows Italy at the beginning of the 16th century in 1501 of the Christian era. So going back to the Renaissance man. The term Renaissance man refers to a person that is an expert and talented in many areas. The true genesis of the Renaissance were great examples, because they not only practiced their own interest, but they excelled. They were excellent in many areas. So I was talking about Leonardo da Vinci as a master painter, sculptor, scientist, inventor, architect, engineer, and also writer, right? He is the classic example, but he is not the only one. We also have Michelangelo, who was a superb painter, sculptor, and architect, and many others that we are going to mention today. So here we have a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci, right? And next we have Michelangelo, and then the other painter that we mentioned in our previous class, Raphael, right? Okay, so let's go with our timeline. In the year 1419, right, the Italian architect Brunelleschi designed the dome for the Florence Cathedral, okay? So he had the design. He was an architect. So number one, he carried out the design, right? And we are going to see him with his plan in his hands, okay? So with all his knowledge, right, in arts, obviously architecture, he makes the plans, and then he had not only the knowledge, but also the money to carry out the project. So here you have the dome of the Florence Cathedral during the day in plain daylight, overlooking the city of Florence. And next, I'm going to show you the same dome by night. You can see the beauty of the mountains in the background. And this is a superb masterpiece. We have to remember, we have to keep in mind that architecture is one of the 7 fine arts. Okay, so what is next? Well, in the year 1450, Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press in England. This is happening in England. And what is the result? Well, here we have Johannes Gutenberg, and next we have his invention, the printing press. What is the result? Well, he started printing books, and before his invention, books had to be written by hand, basically by monks. It was the books were in the hands of the church. They were the ones who decided which books were to be translated, published, and circulated. So when Johannesburg invented the printing press, then people had access to books in many disciplines, science, literature, and so on. So knowledge started to spread first all over Europe and then to the rest of the world. So that was a big change. And that's why it's part of the Renaissance, because knowledge was available to everybody. Next, we have that in the year 1453, the Ottoman Empire captured Constantinople, as we said before. So this signals the end of the Roman Empire, right? And we have here a map of the Ottoman Empire towards the end of the 17th century. This is how big it was, and we can see Constantinople relatively at the center of it, right? At the center. So right before the city of Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire had been split into halves. But Rome fell to the barbarians, and Constantinople survived for a few centuries before falling to the Ottoman Empire. In 1469, Lorenzo de' Medici became the head of the city-state of Florence. And why was that important? Because the Medici family had all the money necessary to commission the artist to perform, to design, and to elaborate masterpieces, all in Florence. And then they traded all forms of art, especially paintings, but all forms of art throughout Italy. And in the year 1485, Henry VII became the King of England. And why is that important? Because he began the Tudor dynasty in England. And we are going to see how his son, Henry VIII, continued his work. In the year 1486, Botticelli completed the painting The Birth of Venus that we saw at the beginning of this presentation. So here again we can see the sense of perspective, color, proportion, and the human figure at the center of the painting. And besides, we have a female. Now, in Spain, what happened in Spain? Well, in the year 1492, the explorer Christopher Columbus arrived in the American continents, and that totally changed everything that had to do with geography in particular and science in general. He was not aware of the fact that the Earth is round. We're going to mention who discovered that, right? But certainly Christopher Columbus was the one that said, well, if I travel to the west, I'm going to circumnavigate to the Indias, and find a new way to travel just there. In 1495, Leonardo da Vinci painted The Last Supper. Okay, and here we can see just a detail. This painting can also illustrate the sense of perspective, volume, and just the human condition, right? It has more to do with humanity than with religion, as we can see in the painting. The apostles are talking to each other. They are having a good time. And we can see that at the center, Jesus might be doing just the same. In 1501, Michelangelo began his work on the sculpture David. And if you remember, we said that he took a long time to do it, right? Nobody knew what exactly he was doing because he was isolated. So it took him a number of years to finish, but we can see in the graph just the beauty, the perfection, right, of every single detail that he put into his work called the David. In the year 1503, Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa, this painting that is in the Louvre and has attracted millions and millions of people. What exactly or who exactly the woman was, that remains a mystery, but certainly it indicates just the mastery, the art of Leonardo da Vinci, not only as a painter, but also, as we said, as a Renaissance man. Now, in the year 1486, between the year 1486 and 1508, Michelangelo started his painting of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican. And we have already mentioned how beautiful this work is. Right now, we are looking at the creation of man, how God is represented with some human nature, and how Adam is touched and given life. And on the right side of your screen, you can see just a detail of the ceiling at the Sistine Chapel. Then in the year 1509, Henry VIII became King of England. And why is that important? Well, because he started the Protestant Church in England, right? It's a split, or a departure, if you will, from the Catholic Church for the first time in history. He was the one that said, I don't need anybody to tell me if I divorce or not, or what I do with my private life. Then in the same year, 1509, the humanist author Erasmus wrote The Praise of Folly. And why is that important? Because he made some sarcastic observations of the Catholic traditions. He is the one that starts questioning all the affairs going on in the Catholic Church. In the year 1511, the painter Raphael elaborated the School of Athens, which indicates a return to the Greeks, a return to the humanism that was lost during the barbarian invasion of the Roman Empire. In the year 1519, Ferdinand Magellan began his voyage around the world. So here we can see an artistic interpretation of Ferdinand Magellan, okay, as a sailor. But next we are going to see the map of his expedition. He started in Spain and he traveled west around the Patagonia, and he arrived to the Philippines. He died in the Philippines, but his crew continued sailing until they arrived back to Spain, going around South Africa, and Africa, and obviously South Africa, the tip of the African continent. Okay, so this has been the main points of the period of time that we call the Renaissance, a period of time when humanism was born and everything changed because people started enjoying life more than before. Before the Renaissance was not the joy of life, but certainly after this period of time, people started thinking about their own lives. They started thinking that they could change their own destiny. Before that, people thought that they were predestined, that there was a predestination. But during the Renaissance, they started changing this thinking and perceiving their lives as something that they could change, something that they could decide what kind of activity, what kind of life they could live, and what they could do with their lives, their history, their passion. So they came to the center of their own lives. Okay, thank you very much for your attention. Please remember that you can ask any kind of questions when we meet together in class. Okay, so see you around. Thank you very much again.